Let's talk about a friend who had a ghost experience abroad. This may be the most sinister experience I've heard recently. In the early 2000s, Wang, a longtime classmate in Indonesia, called Xiaoman. He invested in a shipping company in Indonesia with a local rich businessman. The main business is shipping mining and wood. At this time, when it was time to need manpower, he invited Xiaoman to go abroad to develop. After a period of consideration, Xiaoman took a plane alone in the summer of that year and arrived in Jakarta, Indonesia. When he left the airport, Xiaoman met a middle-aged man in his 50s who was sent by his classmate to pick him up. His name is Wang Shu. After a few hours' drive from the airport, the two of them arrived at the company's residence for Xiaoman. It was an apartment with only 2 high-rise buildings. Xiaoman was arranged to be in the first room, on the right side of the elevator on the 23rd floor. At that time, he didn't know why, but he always felt like he was being watched from behind. When he went in and out of the elevator, even when Wang Shu opened the door in front of the door, the air around him became unusually cold. When he opened the door, the first thing that caught his eye was a huge window facing the sea. A square living room, a spacious master bedroom, and a small kitchen. To be honest, Xiaoman still likes this small apartment. Although the area is less than 100 square meters, it is not difficult to see from the layout of the room that the owner of the room should be a girl with a sense of life. Then Wang Shu handed the key and the door card to Xiaoman. Before leaving, he didn't forget to tell her to close the door when she was sleeping. Maybe it was because of the long journey. After Wang Shu left, Xiaoman fell asleep on the sofa in the living room. But not long after she fell asleep, she heard 2 boys whispering, discussing something with Indonesian in their ears. One of them seemed to be very excited. With Xiaoman's awakening, the whispering stopped. At that time, Xiaoman thought it was the bad soundproofing in the room. The whispering should have come from the next door, so it didn't matter. But who knows? This strange sound was the beginning of her horror experience. This is the first day Xiaoman went to the company to report. Her main job was to go to the headquarters of the company in the south of Jakarta, Sanya, to meet her old classmate Wang. Then, she roughly understood the operation process of the company. Then she met the managers of each department. At 7 a.m., Wang Shu took Xiaoman to the company. When the process was over, it was time to get off work. After that, Wang Shu drove Xiaoman back to her home. After entering the elevator, the strange feeling of yesterday came again. If you feel like you're being watched behind you yesterday, then this time, Xiaoman felt like someone was standing behind her. In a short time of elevator operation, Xiaoman encouraged herself and looked back. There was still nothing. Xiaoman laughed helplessly and thought, if she was too tired to drive these 2 days, so she was suspicious. When she returned to the room, she simply ate something and took a bath. Xiaoman went to bed early and rested. The large bed of more than 2 meters in the room made Xiaoman sleep comfortably. The only thing that made Xiaoman feel uncomfortable was the huge dressing mirror at the corner of the bed. In a daze, Xiaoman was awakened by a strange sound. She rubbed her eyes and came to the balcony to check. It turned out to be the Islamic call across the apartment. At night, she was still praying with a speaker. Xiaoman put on her headphones, turned on the phone music, and then went to bed. Finally, she fell asleep. In her dream, she heard the sound of reciting the ancient Lanjing Sutra again. At that time, Xiaoman was still thinking about herself. She was wearing headphones. How could she hear the sound of the sutra? She opened her eyes in a daze and then suddenly found a white object standing in front of her window. In a daze, Xiaoman thought of getting up, but the whole person seemed to be held back. She couldn't move at all. In a state of panic, Xiaoman wanted to scream loudly, but she found that she couldn't make any sound at all. Xiaoman woke up in an instant and only saw that the other person had long hair. She was wearing a traditional Muslim woman's attire. At this moment, she was facing herself. Just when Xiaoman was still in a daze, the other person seemed to realize that Xiaoman had seen herself and began to turn her head slowly. She saw that the other person was about to turn her head, and Xiaoman screamed and woke up. After waking up, Xiaoman breathed heavily, wiped away the cold sweat all over her head, and got up to drink a cup of water. But when she passed the position where the figure in the dream stood, she only felt that the air around her seemed to have frozen and cooled down more than a few degrees. At this time, Xiaoman realized that everything just now should not be as simple as a dream. The next day at work, Xiaoman received a notice from the old king that the company had arranged a dinner party in Sheldon, mainly to welcome Xiaoman. The dinner lasted for about 3 hours. As a newcomer, Xiaoman drank a lot of wine. Until more than 11 o'clock in the evening, Xiaoman was sent back to the apartment by Wang Shu. Standing in the operating apartment elevator, Xiaoman was sick of it, so she sat down and held her mouth to bear it. But at the moment she bowed, she seemed to see a pair of feet standing behind her. Xiaoman was already in shock. She quickly turned around and saw that there was only Xiaoman in the empty elevator. In this way, Xiaoman got up and held the elevator. When she turned around to confirm, she suddenly found that there was a child standing behind her at this time. This strange child suddenly appeared, and Xiaoman screamed. At the same time, she jumped to the elevator door. But the strange thing is that when she turned around again, she found that the child was gone again. The moment the elevator door opened, Xiaoman rushed out desperately. The whole person was so scared that she couldn't even open the door. She ran into the room and turned on all the lights. Then she hid in bed and shivered. That night, Xiaoman was half asleep and half awake, afraid that she didn't remove her makeup and didn't even go to the bathroom. Then Xiaoman felt that there was something wrong with her body. Her neck and shoulders became unusually heavy, and she felt like she was carrying a bag of sandbags weighing 10 kilograms. Fortunately, nothing unusual happened for a long time. During this period, Xiaoman was hesitating whether to tell the old king about this. It occurred to her that the old king was a shaman, and she never believed in these things. Xiaoman held back. But even if nothing strange happened, the spirit of the ancient orchid across the door made Xiaoman have to take sleeping pills. Because of poor rest, Xiaoman often lost her spirit during the day. Not long after, the old king seemed to have noticed something wrong with Xiaoman. After asking Xiaoman about the reason, he planned to change her a new apartment far from the muslin area. But because the current apartment is 6 months old and it has already been paid, he discussed with Xiaoman whether she could endure it for a while. The old king is the boss, after all. Even if he is a good friend of his classmate, he is also his employee at the moment, and the old king also agreed to help her solve the problem of the house. Thinking about this, Xiaoman can't say anything. She can only nod. Besides, there are some things that Xiaoman still doubts at this time. She thinks maybe she has an illusion. One weekend, Xiaoman took a swimsuit and came to the outdoor pool swimming in the apartment. At the same time, Xiaoman met a local Chinese lady. The other person saw that Xiaoman was also Chinese, so they had a little chat. When they were chatting, Xiaoman was very curious about the history of these two buildings. The Chinese lady was stunned. Obviously, she didn't expect Xiaoman to ask this question. She first looked around and confirmed that there was no one else around, and then lowered her voice and said, "The feng shui of these two buildings is not very good. When the Indonesian riot in 1998, many Chinese were killed here. It is said that someone often encounters dirty things nearby." Xiaoman was worried that the building she had lived in for several months was like this. She always thought that the so-called Ling Yi incident was just her illusion. She didn't expect that this building was really problematic. Thinking about this, Xiao Man felt speechless. She also greeted the ancestors of the old Wang family. Since Xiao Man learned about the history of the apartment, every time she walked into the apartment building, she felt strange. On the weekend, she asked Uncle Wang to take her to countless local small temples and asked for a lot of money to pay for her house. Although it cost a lot of money, it seemed that these things were of little use. The next night, Xiao Man had another nightmare. At that time, Xiao Man in her dream couldn't wake up at all, but she was in a strange state of consciousness. What's more strange is that, although she couldn't open her eyes, she could clearly feel that someone was jumping around on her stomach. It felt like a child sitting gently on her mother's stomach, and suddenly stood up and sat down like a game. Even in a trance, she could hear the child's laughter. After about 10 minutes, Xiao Man screamed and woke up from her dream, looking at the dark bedroom. And the strange mirror at the corner of the bed, Xiao Man suddenly felt that this room was too big for her, and it was a little too big. She had never been so afraid and never felt so helpless. This night, Xiao Man could not sleep again. The next morning, after Xiao Man came to the company, she rushed into Wang's office at once and almost yelled at Wang that she would move out of that terrible house immediately so that she could not wait a day. Wang was obviously scared by Xiao Man's performance and asked Xiao Man what happened. Then Xiao Man told Wang about her experience and told Wang very clearly that all her experiences were not illusions. After hearing Xiao Man's story, Wang also realized the seriousness of the matter and first arranged Xiao Man to stay in Shangri-La near the company and let people help Xiao Man find a suitable place to stay. Just when the registration process was in progress, Xiao Man's phone suddenly rang. When she took out her phone, her friend Kun called. Kun knew that Xiao Man was in Jakarta, and she happened to be working in Jakarta, so he planned to have a meal with Xiao Man. After learning this news, Xiao Man was very happy. It's not easy for a country to meet a friend, so she told her friend that she would be staying in Shangri-La for the next few days, and that she could come any time. The next day after work, Kun learned that Xiao Man was staying in Shangri-La, so he booked a hotel for her. When they were eating, Kun looked at Xiao Man and looked like he was talking to her. Xiao Man also saw that Kun had something to say, so she smiled and told Kun to say it directly. Kun asked carefully, "Xiao Man, are you not feeling well? Why do you look so pale?" As soon as Xiao Man's eyes turned red, she told Kun about her strange experience recently. After hearing this, Kun said, "After dinner, go to my room. I'll get you something." After that, Xiao Man and Kun came to Kun's room. After chatting for a while, Kun took out a red cloth bag with a colorful rope tied in it from the luggage box and put a Buddha card in it. Kun handed the cloth bag to Xiao Man and said, "This Buddha card is for the monks. It's not a mess of the stall. You must keep it well and wear it with you. You'd better find a good master to help you. You can't delay this." A few days later, Kun was going back to China. Before leaving, he reminded Xiao Man again that she must find a master as soon as possible and never delay it. Without realizing it, Xiao Man stayed in the hotel for almost a week. After seeing Xiao Man's mental state much better in the room, Kun asked Xiao Man tentatively, "The search for a house is still going on. It's hard to find a house nearby. Can you go back to the original apartment? The people in the company have been watching you staying in the hotel." Xiao Man is in a good mood recently and understands the situation of Kun, but it's still a good chance for Xiao Man to go back to that apartment. The final negotiation between Xiao Man and Kun was to go back to the original apartment first. During this period, the company continued to help Xiaoman find a house. And the new house must be voted by Xiaoman. In this way, in an unavoidable situation, Xiaoman went back to the apartment that she had been waiting for. What surprised Xiaoman was that a more terrible thing was about to happen. When Xiaoman's elevator was running to the 8th floor, she only heard a click. The elevator suddenly stopped. As the elevator door was opened, Xiaoman saw a lot of people outside the elevator. It seemed like something happened, but because it was all in Indonesian, the only thing Xiaoman could understand was the word pity. Xiaoman was curious and walked out of the elevator. She ran into the crowd and heard a sound of crying. "What's wrong with you? Wake up! Wake up!" Xiaoman was curious. Is the other person Chinese? How can he speak Chinese? She finally squeezed to the door and saw the situation inside. Xiaoman suddenly breathed a sigh of relief and got goosebumps. She only saw 2 girls squatting in the room. One was crying, and the other one, Xiaoman really didn't know how to describe it. The only thing that was certain was that the other person was also a girl. A bald face, no hair, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and like an egg with a shell. Xiaoman was almost shocked and screamed. Although she didn't know this strange girl, she often met her in the small supermarket downstairs. When she saw her before, she was also a beautiful girl. She had a long hair and curly eyebrows and long eyelashes. How did it suddenly become like this? The other girl was crying like a crybaby, but the girl with the egg was looking away. Her eyes were looking in one direction, and her mouth was constantly watering. She didn't say anything. Although they didn't know each other, they all came from China. They helped each other as much as they could. Xiaoman asked gently at the door, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" The crying girl shook her head and said, "I don't know what happened. After I came back last night, I was locked in the door until I found her. She had no hair, no eyebrows, and even all the hair on her body. I asked her. She didn't say anything and just stayed there. She didn't eat or drink for a day. What should I do?" After that, the girl cried even more. Then Xiaoman dispersed the people watching the party. Then she went into the house and closed the door and talked to the crying girl in detail. It turned out that these 2 girls all came from Shenzhen to work in Indonesia. The crying girl's name is Ting Ting, and the egg-shaped girl's name is Xiaoxin. The 2 sisters came from China to Indonesia for more than a year. Ting Ting also said, "Xiaoxin has been abnormal lately. She often laughs in the room at night. She either cried a lot, and it lasted for more than a week. But the next day I asked her why, but she seemed to know nothing. And recently, when she got up, she saw that she was sitting there alone, staring blankly at the window and when talking to her. Her reaction was slow, and Xiaoxin often had nightmares. After living here for half a year, she always said that someone was standing in front of her window. When she heard this, Xiaoman was very anxious, and her hair was about to explode. Isn't Xiaoxin's experience exactly the same as what she encountered? Although she was very afraid, Xiaoman still calmly comforted Ting Ting and asked her to inform Xiaoxin's family quickly to see if they could come to Indonesia to pick her up. At the same time, Xiaoman also left her phone number and told Ting Ting that if there was anything she could help, she would call this number. Then, Xiaoman left Ting Ting and Xiaoxin's apartment on the 8th floor. After leaving, Xiaoman did not return to her room on the 23rd floor, but immediately called Wang and told him with almost a command, "Pack up the guest room at home and move in by yourself." After experiencing what happened just now, Xiaoman did not have the courage to live here anymore. At that moment, Xiaoman no longer cared if Wang was her boss, because in this place, the only person she could ask for help was Wang. After Xiaoman arrived at Wang's house, she first cried and cried until she vented her anger and then told Wang everything she had experienced and saw on the 8th floor. After hearing Xiaoman's description, Wang looked at Xiaoman in confusion and repeatedly asked, "Are you telling the truth?" And about Wang's confusion, Xiaoman understood. Because for a soulless person, what Xiaoman had experienced was too mysterious, so mysterious that even Xiaoman felt a little bit incredible. In her words, if it weren't for her own experience, she might never believe that such a thing would happen in her life. After that, Xiaoman lived at Wang's house for about 2 weeks and had to return to that haunted house again. Because Wang's girlfriend came back, it was really inappropriate for Xiaoman to continue living there. And the company didn't know what was going on and still couldn't help Xiaoman find a new house. On the night Xiaoman returned to the apartment, she took a shower and found the Buddha card that Kun had given her before and hung it on the hook of the window. She also found a Buddhist scripture in the drawer and put it by her window and prayed for a long time before she fell asleep. Not long after, Xiaoman seemed to be asleep, but she seemed to be awake and kept dreaming all night. In her dream, a man and a woman were talking to themselves. It seemed that they were very dissatisfied with Xiaoman staying here. They spent the night half dreaming and half awake until they were woken up by the alarm clock. Xiaoman was just about to sit up, but her head hit a hard object. Xiaoman was dizzy, and her forehead felt a burning pain. The whole person immediately woke up and wanted to sit up, but couldn't get up. Until then, Xiaoman was surprised to find that she was not sleeping on the bed, but lying on the bed and covered with a quilt. Xiaoman hurriedly climbed out of the bed and saw that the height of the bed was just enough for Xiaoman to climb out alone. Xiaoman was not only curious, but also difficult to climb in when she woke up. When she fell asleep, and how did she appear? At the bottom of the bed. Did she dream again? But she never had the experience of dreaming. Even if she really had the habit of dreaming, how could she have been covered with a quilt? Just when Xiaoman was at a loss, she suddenly remembered the dream she had last night and thought carefully about the couple in her dream. Xiaoman was not only sweating, but also put herself in the dream. Or maybe this is a special warning. After the incident at the bottom of the bed, the room was peaceful for a while. This is also why Xiaoman confirmed that she had encountered a spiritual experience. She doubted whether it was an illusion, because what Xiaoman encountered was not a continuous one, but it just happened occasionally. As time went by, the Muslim country was soon in a year-on-year recession. This month was a big day for all Muslims. They could not eat or drink from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. The number of times they were worshipped increased from 3 times to 5 times. And the Songjing big horn, facing Xiaoman's balcony, was a bell that kept ringing. During this time, most Chinese in Jakarta went on vacation and gave the whole city to the locals. Many companies also began to take a break. Xiaoman received a notice from the king that the company would arrange several major leaders to go to the villa where the big boss was staying for a few days. On the one hand, it was a vacation. On the other hand, it was a temporary avoidance of this sensitive period. When Xiaoman heard this news, she was undoubtedly very excited, because since she came here, she has not played well, except for work. The most important thing is that she can leave the house for a while. I don't know when. There will be an abnormal meeting. According to Xiaoman, the villa of the big boss is 30 acres. In addition to a 3-story building, that there is a very large garden. In the garden, there are flowers and many durians and mango trees that cannot be called by name, and a super beautiful pool. There are palm trees around the pool and a very comfortable platform bed. That night, everyone had a barbecue here, until late at night. Xiao Man lay on the bed and looked up at the starry sky. The stars in the sky were clearly visible. The air was full of flowers and fruits. She fell asleep on the bed without realizing it. Xiao Man, who fell asleep, dreamed again. But the dream of the night was really strange. She seemed to be sucked by a mysterious force and separated her soul and body. She stood by the bedside of the pool and watched herself sleeping on the bed and tried hard to return to her body. But she couldn't go back. And on the other side of the bed, there was a figure who seemed to have the same idea as Xiao Man and wanted to enter Xiao Man's body. Xiao Man suddenly realized that something was wrong and tried hard to push each other up. At the same time, Xiao Man suddenly heard Wang shouting his name. The voice was full of anxiety, then a flash of pain in the face. Xiao Man woke up from the dream. Open your eyes. You can only see Wang and his girlfriend, standing by their bedside. The company was also surrounded by themselves. They seemed to be discussing something. Before Xiao Man could speak, Wang pulled Xiao Man up and said he would send her back to her room to rest. But Xiao Man just got off the ground and felt weak. Her legs were weak and almost fell to the ground. Wang and his girlfriend saw this and helped Xiao Man quickly and sent Xiao Man back to her room. During this time, Xiao Man kept asking Wang what happened just now. But no matter how Wang asked, he was always gloomy and didn't speak. After sending Xiao Man back to her room, Wang said, "You scared the hell out of me just now. You almost stared at the sky for an hour and didn't blink your eyes for an hour. Everyone was calling you at the time and trying to wake you up. But you didn't react at all. In the end, there was no way. I patted you on the face, and you woke up." After hearing Wang's words, Xiao Man wanted to tell Wang about her dream experience. But she thought, Wang was a firm and ungodly person. Maybe Wang didn't believe in her, and just did it. Thinking back to what happened in the dream, Xiao Man thought, she must have been in a state of divorce, as the legend said. And the figure that fought with her body. Could it be the legendary dosha? Xiao Man was, obviously, not professional about these questions. Until later, she met the master, who was called Ant, and got some effective answers and help. Not long after she came back from the villa, it was time for Xiao Man to go back to China. Then, Xiao Man packed her things and flew back to Shanghai, just like most people who went abroad to work. After returning to China, Xiao Man began to meet old friends who had not seen her for a long time. Many friends said Xiao Man was thin and had a bad face. After meeting her, Xiao Man told everyone about her strange experience in Jakarta. Among many friends, there was a friend who was close to Xiao Man. After talking about Xiao Man's experience, he said very seriously that she was full of bad luck and her eyes were not right. This is definitely not a good thing. If it continues, your luck will be worse and worse. It's very dangerous. Then Xiao Yu asked if she felt tired recently. The cup seemed to be carrying something heavy. After Xiao Man finished listening, the whole person was stunned. Asked how she knew, Xiao Yu told Xiao Man that it was because there was more than one thing on her body, or so she felt. Heavier and heavier. Or you can go to my house tomorrow. I'll help you think of a way. The next morning, Xiao Man came to Xiao Yu's house and sneaked into the Buddhist hall set by Xiao Yu at home. Then she learned how Xiao Yu looked and did her business. After a long time, Xiao Yu got up and took a pair of black keyed bracelets from the altar. Let Xiao Man wear it on her hand and not take it off easily. During this time, Xiao Yu also persuaded Xiao Man to resign and leave there. But Xiaoman also has her own difficulties. After all, she has signed a 3-year contract with the company. It's not that she can resign. Besides, the boss, Lao Wang, is her old classmate. She was a little uncomfortable in terms of feelings. After hearing it, Xiao Yu was silent. Turn around and take out a business card and tell Xiaoman that. This person is her classmate's aunt. Harbin people are the most sick in the circle. But if Xiaoman only stays in Shanghai for a week, it may not be in time. She will go to Southeast Asia next month. At that time, she will go to Indonesia to see Xiaoman. Xiao Yu also said that she would try to meet her aunt first. If the other party has time, she will take her aunt to Jakarta to help Xiaoman with things. A few days later, Xiaoman returned to Jakarta. Although in the next period of time, Xiaoman did not encounter any strange things, but she could see that her face was getting worse day by day. The weight on the back is getting stronger. When she returned to the apartment, she was either insomnia or nightmares. After returning to Jakarta for more than a month, Xiao Yu really came here with her aunt. Speaking of the impression of her aunt, there is nothing special in Xiaoman's eyes. The roll of the circle in Xiao Yu's mouth is really like ordinary middle-aged women in China. To say that it is a special feeling, that is an inexplicable sense of intimacy, is emitted from her aunt. That makes people feel very comfortable. Xiaoman brought her aunt and Xiao Yu to the apartment where she lived. Her aunt was thinking that. Xiaoman and Xiao Yu were waiting outside, and she went in first. After a while, Xiaoman heard the sound of something falling on the ground. Looking in, she saw her aunt sprinkling food on the corners of the house. Until she was done, her aunt explained to Xiaoman that this is a drum to get rid of some grudges. Then she said that it was not difficult to clean up these things, but there were a lot of things to prepare, and some were not easy to find abroad. It may take time to find all of them. Xiaoman took a look at the list sent by her aunt, and there were about 10 things written on it. 7-color cloth, 5-color cloth, white paper, red, yellow, blue, green, black paper, 8 red candles, 7 dates, oranges, grapes, walnuts, and all kinds of grains, and some other offerings, she said. Speaking of the things on the list, the strangest thing was a 4-legged stool. After reading the things on the list, Xiaoman was too old to understand, so she could only call her uncle and ask him for help. After all, Uncle Wang was more familiar with Agata. But after Uncle Wang read the list, he was also embarrassed and told everyone that it was hard to buy black paper here, and that almost no one used it, and that there were red dates and walnuts, and which were not common here. She was not sure if she could find all of them, so she tried her best to find them. Next, Xiaoman and Uncle Wang almost drove past half of Agata, and then they found all the things on the list. But in the end, it was also the most important thing. That made Xiaoman's head hurt. This 4-legged stool was really not found. At that time, Xiaoman and Uncle Wang almost visited all the furniture stores, but they could not find it. In the end, they could only buy a 4-legged flower stand from a flower shop at a high price in place of it. After coming home, Xiaoman was already exhausted. After Auntie sorted out the things she bought, she told Xiaoman not to go to the company on Monday. At that time, she wanted to help Xiaoman to talk about the method. On Monday morning, Xiaoman was woken up by Auntie and pushed to the bathroom to take a bath. Auntie said that she must finish all the work before 6 o'clock, including the incense, the 4-legged stool, and the god. Xiaoman finished Auntie's request in a hurry. Then she saw Auntie put the 7-color cloth on the bed and put a charm on Xiaoman's body. She put a star-shaped mirror on her belly and covered her body with a 5-color cloth. After that, Auntie closed the window of the room completely and drew something similar to a formation on the ground next to the bed and lit 8 red candles. On each side, there were offerings and small paper people cut from the material. After everything was ready, Auntie wrote the end of the red thread on the middle finger of Xiaoman's right hand, and the end was written in the middle of the flower stand. Then she lit 3 incenses and began to chant. At first, Xiaoman didn't feel anything strange. When she heard the sound of incense, she felt dizzy slowly. After about an hour, she suddenly heard the sound of the charm on her body. It felt like someone was playing with her fingers. It was very scary, but because there was no place to ventilate in the room. So how did the charms on her body move without wind? There was also a candle on the ground. The candle flame in one direction was particularly weak, but some were very bright. After a while, Xiaoman heard the sound of Auntie's chanting getting louder and louder. She slowly opened her eyes and saw Auntie sweating. But Xiaoman felt colder and colder, like she was in the freezer, and she kept shaking. At this time, Xiaoman's neck suddenly tightened, like someone had a stiff throat. Breathing became very difficult. Auntie seemed to have realized the strange feeling in Xiaoman's body. The saint said, "Remember, if you really can't stand it, you have to tell me in time." And at the last moment, Xiaoman suddenly passed out like she was electrocuted. When she opened her eyes again, she just felt sore all over, like she had run a marathon. Xiaoman struggled to get up and looked around. At this time, the curtains in the house were pulled open, and the sun was shining on her from the window. It felt like she had been sleeping for a long time before she woke up, and the weight on her shoulders had also disappeared. After Auntie saw Xiaoman wake up, she said with a smile, "You recovered faster than I thought. The ritual is over. The dirt on your body has come out. You can go to the altar of the flower shelf and have a look." Xiaoman turned her head and looked at the flower shelf in the aisle. She only saw the oil lamp on the flower shelf was still burning. Suddenly, Xiaoman saw a strange change on a paper man. The face of a paper man had a facial expression. Xiaoman unknowingly approached, but the paper man with the expression suddenly moved, and Xiaoman sat on the floor immediately. At this time, Auntie said, "This thing is not ordinary. Don't go too far to investigate the rest. It's not good for you to know too much. In the afternoon, I will take this thing to the temple to purify it, and let it go on its way. As for what you think, I understand. Don't worry, he won't bother you again. Let's not be too decisive. We should keep an eye on everything we do. The whole thing is over here." Finally, Xiaoman stayed in Indonesia for 3 years, and regardless of the old king's delay, she insisted on returning to Shanghai life.